Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I have a question for you. What would you do if you saw someone being disrespected in front of you? Would you step in and help, or would you stay silent? Think about it. Now, let's see what happens when Emily Dawson, a woman with a secret, faces something she never expected. It was a bright, sunny morning in the middle of spring when Emily Dawson stepped out of her apartment. The flowers in the park were blooming, and the air smelled fresh with the scent of grass and earth. Birds chirped loudly above, but none of that mattered to Emily. She couldn't see any of it, but Emily didn't mind. She had learned long ago that the world was a different place for people like her. Emily was blind. She couldn't see the colors of the sky or the faces of people around her. But that didn't stop her from living her life. No, Emily was used to the world that most people only saw through their eyes, but she saw it through her other senses. As Emily stepped onto the sidewalk, she held her white cane out in front of her. Talp, talp, talp. The sound of the cane hitting the ground gave her the direction she needed. She had walked the same path many times before. She knew the street, the sounds, and even the smell of the coffee shop up ahead. She could walk this path with her eyes closed, and that's exactly what she was doing. But today was different. Today, Emily was not alone. Her faithful companion, Max, walked beside her. Max was not just any dog. Max was Emily's guide dog. He was her protector, her helper, and most importantly, her friend. He was big, strong, and smart. Max wasn't just any regular dog. He had been trained to help guide Emily safely through the world. He knew the sounds of traffic, the obstacles on the street, and even when to stop, so Emily wouldn't accidentally walk into something. Max had been trained for a special job, and he did it well. But there was something more about Max, something no one else knew. Max wasn't just a guide dog. He wasn't just trained to help a blind woman walk safely. Max had a past, a history that few people ever saw. Max was a retired Navy SEAL K-9. A retired Navy SEAL K-9. That's right, Max had served in the military. He had been trained to protect and serve in dangerous situations. He had saved lives. He had been on missions that most people would never even imagine. And he had been by Emily's side since the day he retired. Today, as they walked together through the busy city street, they passed the usual group of people. Workers hurrying to their jobs, mothers with strollers, and children laughing as they ran to school. Emily didn't notice them much. She never did. She only heard the sounds of their footsteps, the noise of the cars, and the busy city life around her. She trusted Max to guide her through it all. But as they walked further, something started to feel off. Emily's cane tapped against the ground, and Max's steps grew a little slower. He was always so calm, so steady, but today something was different. Emily felt it too. Max's ears perked up. She could feel him tense beside her. And then she heard it. Loud, rough laughter came from a group of men sitting outside a nearby cafe. Emily didn't know them, but she could feel their eyes on her. The way they stared, the way they laughed. She didn't need to see their faces to know they were talking about her. Look at this, one of the men said in a voice full of mockery. Blind girl walking around like she's special or something. But she's got that dog for a reason, huh? The other men chuckled. Probably just trying to get sympathy. Emily's heart sank. She didn't let it show on her face, but inside, she felt a knot form in her stomach. She had dealt with this before. People staring at her because she couldn't see. People thinking that just because she was blind, she was weak or helpless. People who couldn't understand that she was just like everyone else, just trying to live her life. But Max was different. Max could sense things she couldn't. And he knew what to do when someone was being disrespectful. As they continued walking, the men's laughter grew louder. Emily could feel their eyes following her, judging her. She took a deep breath, trying to ignore them. But that was easier said than done. She heard one of the men stand up. His heavy boots clanked on the ground as he walked toward her. "Hey, blind lady," he called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You really need that dog to get around? Or are you just using it to get some attention?" Emily's heart raced, but she kept walking. She was used to this kind of behavior. She had learned how to ignore it. But Max was having none of it. Max growled low in his throat. It wasn't loud, but it was a warning that said, Don't mess with my person. The man stopped in his tracks. He laughed, not understanding what Max was trying to say. What's this? The dog's gonna protect you now? That's rich. But Max didn't stop. He stood beside Emily, his body tense, ready to take action if the situation got worse. His eyes locked on the man, and Emily felt the strong presence of her loyal companion by her side. And then something happened. Something Emily didn't expect. The man took a step closer. Too close. He raised his hand as if he was going to touch Emily, to push her aside or mock her further. But before he could do anything, Max moved. With a sudden, powerful movement, Max stepped forward and blocked the man's path. His teeth were bared now, his growl louder and more serious. The man hesitated. He had never expected this. Emily's voice was steady but firm. "Don't touch me," she said quietly, her words sharp. "Don't touch my dog." For a moment there was silence. The man was stunned. He hadn't expected a response like that. He hadn't expected to be confronted by a blind woman and her retired Navy SEAL dog. He took a step back, his face red with embarrassment. The other men at the cafe watched, unsure of what to do. They had been laughing, but now they saw that Max wasn't just any dog. And Emily wasn't just any blind woman. She was someone who knew how to stand up for herself. She had someone who would always have her back. The man turned away, muttering something under his breath. "Whatever," he said, walking back to his friends. "Weirdo." Emily didn't react. She just kept walking, Max right beside her. She knew the situation was over. She didn't need to make a scene. She didn't need to explain herself. As they continued down the sidewalk, Emily felt a little lighter. She had stood up for herself, without even having to see. And Max? Max had made sure no one would mess with her. It was moments like this that made Emily feel grateful for the life she had. She couldn't see the world the way others did, but she didn't need to. She had learned to rely on her other senses, and most importantly, she had learned to trust Max. He had seen things in his life that most people would never understand, and now he was her protector. Today, Emily Dawson wasn't just a blind woman walking down the street. She was someone with a powerful secret, and her guide dog was no ordinary dog. Max was her hero. The sun was still bright, and the streets were buzzing with the sounds of people rushing by. The city was alive, with cars honking, children laughing, and the hum of voices all around. Emily was walking down the sidewalk, her cane tapping lightly against the ground with each step. Max walked beside her, his strong body moving with a calm confidence that only a dog with a past like his could have. They had walked this street many times before, so Emily didn't need to worry about what was ahead. Max always knew where to go, but today something felt different. Something in the air made Emily feel uneasy. It wasn't the usual busy noise of the city. No, today it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Ahead of them, across the street, there was a group of bikers sitting outside a cafe. They were loud, laughing with each other, their voices echoing across the sidewalk. Emily didn't know them, but she could feel their eyes on her. She had learned long ago that people often stared at her because she was blind, but she also knew how to ignore it. Still, something about the way they were looking at her made her feel uneasy. As she walked closer, she could hear their laughter growing louder. One of the men, a big guy with a thick beard, leaned over to his friend. His voice was rough, and he was clearly trying to get the attention of the others. "Look at this, guys," he said, his voice filled with mockery. "Blind girl with a dog. Bet she thinks she's a hero or something." The group of bikers laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel small, the kind that made you feel like you didn't belong. Emily didn't flinch. She couldn't see them, but she could feel their eyes on her. She had felt it before, the way people treated her differently, the way they thought she was weak because she couldn't see. She had learned how to live with it. She had learned how to stay calm and keep walking no matter what people thought. But Max? Max wasn't just any dog. Max wasn't going to let anyone disrespect Emily. He was different. Emily knew it. He had always been loyal to her, always there to help, to protect. And when he sensed danger or when someone was being unkind to her, he didn't stay quiet. Max's ears twitched. Emily felt it in the way he moved. He knew something wasn't right. She could feel his body tense up beside her. He was alert, his eyes focused ahead, and she knew that if things went wrong, Max was ready to protect her. The bikers didn't stop. They didn't realize the kind of dog they were dealing with. They didn't understand that Max was not just a regular guide dog. He was a retired Navy SEAL K-9. He had been trained to do things most people couldn't even imagine. He had been trained for tough situations. He had been trained to protect and to follow commands, no matter how dangerous things might get. He was loyal to Emily, and if anyone threatened her, they were going to find out just how powerful and smart he really was. But these bikers, they didn't know that. They just saw a blind woman and her dog, and they thought they could make fun of her. Yeah, a real hero, the man with the beard sneered, his voice loud enough for Emily to hear. She's probably just a burden, and that dog's probably just for show. Emily's heart began to race, but she didn't show it. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing that they had affected her. Instead, she kept walking, her cane tapping the ground, her steps steady. She trusted Max. She knew that he would make sure no one got too close. No one did anything that would hurt her. Max, sensing the tension, moved a little closer to her side. He could feel the weight of the situation too. His body was stiff, ready for whatever came next. The group of bikers watched Emily as she walked past, their eyes following her every move. One of them, a younger man with a loud voice, stood up and started to walk toward her. His boots made heavy thuds on the ground as he approached. "Hey lady," he called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You really need that dog to get around? Or is it just for attention?" His words were harsh. Emily could feel the anger in his voice. She didn't want to stop. She didn't want to let him win by showing that he had upset her. But she also knew that things were getting worse. Max was still beside her, his eyes locked on the man. Emily didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just kept walking, one step after another. But Max? Max wasn't just walking. Max was getting ready. The man reached out, trying to get too close to Emily. But before he could touch her or do anything else, Max stepped in front of him. The dog's massive frame blocked the man's path, and he stopped in his tracks, surprised by the sudden movement. Max's eyes didn't leave the man's face. His teeth were showing, his low growl rumbling in his throat. It wasn't a playful growl. This was a serious warning. Max had no intention of letting this man get any closer to Emily. "Back off," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to make a scene. She just needed to make it clear that she wasn't afraid of this man. And neither was Max. The man froze. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected a dog like Max to be so protective, so ready to defend the woman by his side. His eyes darted between Max and Emily. He could see the dog's strong stance, the way Max was standing between him and Emily. The man slowly backed away, his hands raised as if to say he was done with the confrontation. "Yeah, whatever," the man muttered, turning away and heading back to his friends. Stupid dog. Emily didn't react. She didn't need to. Max had handled the situation. The tension that had been in the air just moments ago seemed to disappear. Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she knew that things weren't always this easy. Max stayed close to her as they continued down the street. She could feel the other bikers watching them, but none of them said anything else. They had learned their lesson. Max had made it clear that Emily wasn't someone to be messed with. The rest of the walk was quiet. Emily could feel the city's noise around her, but she didn't mind. She had Max by her side. Max, her protector, her friend. He had kept her safe once again, and that's all that mattered. But as they walked away from the cafe, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Something about those bikers, something about the way they looked at her, made her think that they might try something again. Max knew it too. He had sensed it before she did. He was always ready, always on guard. They weren't safe yet. The tension was still there, lurking in the background. And Emily? She wasn't sure what would happen next. But she knew one thing for sure. Max would be there. He always would be. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's morning walks had become routine. She passed the bikers almost every day, and every time, they made some crude remark or laughed at her. But Emily? She said nothing. She just walked on, her hand resting lightly on Max's harness. Each day, as the sun rose high in the sky, Emily would leave her small apartment and make her way down the same street, walking with Max by her side. The city around her was always busy, always noisy, but she was used to it. Emily's steps were confident, even though she couldn't see the world around her. She relied on Max, her guide dog, to lead her. Max had been her guide for years, helping her navigate through the challenges that came with being blind. For the most part, Emily was used to being ignored or treated like she didn't belong. People didn't understand what it was like to live in her world. They didn't know the strength it took to walk through life without being able to see. And they certainly didn't understand what it was like to have a dog like Max by her side. A dog who wasn't just any guide dog. He was her protector. But then there were the bikers. Every morning, without fail, they would be there. The same group of rough-looking men sitting outside the cafe, laughing and talking as they drank their coffee. They always noticed Emily, always made fun of her. They thought it was funny. They thought it was amusing to laugh at the blind woman and her dog. Sometimes they'd make cruel jokes, sometimes they'd just stare. Emily could feel their eyes on her, even though she couldn't see them. At first it bothered her. She didn't like the way they treated her. She didn't like the way they seemed to think she was weak, just because she was blind. But she didn't let it show. She kept walking, her hand on Max's harness, her mind focused on where she was going. She knew how to ignore people like them. She had to. Max, however, wasn't so good at ignoring them. Max had been trained for situations like this. He wasn't just a regular guide dog. He had been through intense training as a Navy SEAL K-9. He had learned how to detect danger, how to protect, and how to serve. And he had a deep loyalty to Emily. If someone was going to hurt her or make her feel unsafe, Max wouldn't stand for it. As the weeks went by, the bikers' taunts became more frequent. They never stopped. Every time Emily passed them, they would say something. Sometimes it was a cruel remark. Other times it was just laughter. But Emily? She never said a word. She just kept walking. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing that their words had hurt her. But Max? He noticed. Every time they got close, Max's behavior began to change. Emily could feel it. His body would stiffen, and his ears would perk up. He would stand taller, his eyes locked on the bikers, watching them closely. It was like he knew they were trouble. It was like he knew something was coming, something that wasn't quite right. At first, Emily didn't pay much attention. She figured Max was just being his usual vigilant self. After all, he had always been alert, always watching out for her. But this felt different. One morning, as they passed the cafe once again, the bikers were sitting there as usual. This time, they were louder, more obnoxious. One of the men, the big one with the beard, shouted at her. "Hey, blind girl, how's the world looking today? You see anything new?" He yelled, his voice full of laughter. The others laughed along with him, their voices like thunder in the quiet street. But this time, Emily noticed something different. Max didn't just stand tall. He growled softly under his breath, a deep rumble that was barely audible, but it was there. Emily stopped for a moment. She felt Max's muscles tense, and she knew. She knew something was about to happen. Max's growl wasn't just a sound. It was a warning. Emily had heard it before during their training. She remembered how he had growled when they practiced defense moves, when they were learning how to react to dangerous situations. The growl was always followed by action. Max wasn't the type to back down from a threat. The bikers didn't seem to notice. They were too busy laughing, too busy thinking they had the upper hand. But Emily knew better. Max was ready. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. She didn't say anything, but she gently squeezed Max's harness, giving him a small, quiet command. Max's growl stopped, but his posture didn't change. He was still alert, his body coiled tight like a spring, ready to protect her if he needed to. "Keep walking, Max," Emily whispered, her voice calm but firm. "We're just going to keep walking." And so they did. Max moved forward, his steps steady and strong. But Emily could feel the tension in his body. She could feel his every move, every twitch of his muscles. Max wasn't just walking. He was watching. He was ready for whatever the bikers might do next. But the bikers didn't do anything this time. They just watched as Emily and Max walked past. After that, Emily began to notice small changes in Max's behavior. It wasn't just the bikers' taunts that made him react. Every time they got close, Max would grow more alert. His ears would twitch, his eyes would scan the area, his tail would stiffen. He was watching everything, every movement, every sound. It was like he was waiting for something big. Emily couldn't figure it out at first. She didn't know if it was the bikers themselves or if it was something else. But she trusted Max. She knew he had his reasons. He was always one step ahead of her, always keeping her safe. One morning, as they walked past the cafe again, the bikers were there, but this time something felt different. The air was thick with tension. The bikers were still laughing, still making fun of her, but this time they were watching Max more closely. "Look at that dog," the big man with the beard said, his voice lower than usual. "That dog's no ordinary mutt. Something's off about him." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected them to notice. She hadn't expected them to see through the disguise. But they were starting to understand. They were starting to realize that Max wasn't just any dog. Max didn't respond. He just kept walking, his head held high, his eyes locked on the bikers. Emily could feel the air around them grow heavier, like a storm was coming. The bikers were no longer laughing. They were still staring at Max, their eyes wide with something else. It wasn't just mockery now. There was something else in their gaze. Fear? Suspicion? Emily couldn't tell, but she could feel the shift. She could feel it in the way Max carried himself, too. He wasn't just walking now. He was watching them, every step bringing them closer to whatever would happen next. The morning started like any other. Emily stepped outside her apartment, feeling the cool breeze on her face. The sound of birds chirping in the trees made her smile, even though she couldn't see them. She trusted Max, her loyal guide dog, to lead the way. Max had been her protector for years, always watching out for her, keeping her safe. And today was no different. She could feel the warmth of the sun on her face as they started their usual walk. But as they walked down the street, something felt different. Emily noticed that Max was walking a little faster than usual. His steps were more firm, more purposeful. She trusted him. Max always knew when something was off. She had learned to listen to him, and right now he was telling her that something was coming. As they got closer to the cafe where the bikers always hung out, Emily could feel the tension building in the air. She had walked past them every day for weeks, and every time they had taunted her. But today felt different. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a change coming. Maybe it was just the way Max was acting. Maybe it was the bikers' strange silence as they noticed her walking up. The usual group of bikers was sitting at their table, laughing loudly. Their voices carried over the street, making fun of anyone who walked by. Emily could hear them before she saw them, and she knew what was coming. They had always mocked her for being blind, for walking with a dog. But today, she wasn't going to ignore them. Today, she knew Max was ready. He was ready for what was about to happen. As Emily and Max approached, she could feel the bikers' eyes on her. She could almost hear them sneering, their judgment heavy in the air. Emily kept walking, one foot in front of the other. Max was by her side, his head held high. He was steady, alert, watching the bikers carefully. He had always been ready to protect her. But today, something was different. He wasn't just standing beside her as a guide dog anymore. He was ready to show them who he really was. Then, just as they were about to pass the group of bikers, one of the men, the big one with the thick beard, stepped into their path. He smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Hey, you lost or something, lady?" he sneered, stepping right into Emily's way, blocking her path. His friends laughed behind him, but Emily didn't flinch. She could feel Max's muscles tense as the biker got closer. Without a word, Max moved closer to Emily, positioning himself between her and the biker. He let out a low growl deep in his chest. It was a warning, a sound that made the biker stop in his tracks. The growl was like thunder in the quiet morning air, and for a moment, everything went still. The bikers stopped laughing. They stopped talking. They could feel it, the power in Max's stance. They didn't know what they were up against. "Max!" Emily called softly, her voice calm and steady. She knew what was happening. She didn't need to see to understand what Max was doing. He was protecting her, and he was ready to do whatever it took. Max's growl grew louder, his body tight with readiness. The big biker took a step back, unsure of what to do next. He had never seen anything like this. Max's growl wasn't just a sound. It was a warning that told the biker to stay away. The tension in the air was thick, and Emily could feel it. The biker, looking confused but still full of bravado, took another step forward, trying to push past Max. But Max wasn't having it. He moved faster than the biker could react. With one swift movement, Max lunged forward. His powerful body slammed into the biker, knocking him down with a force that shook the ground beneath them. The biker let out a loud yelp of surprise as he hit the ground, his arms flailing as he tried to catch himself. "What the hell?" the biker yelled, scrambling to get up, his face red with anger and shock. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had thought the blind girl and her dog were easy targets, but now he was on the ground, stunned by the force of Max's attack. Max didn't stop. He stood tall, growling deep in his throat, making it clear that he wasn't going to let this go. The biker stayed on the ground, his hands raised as if to protect himself. The other bikers watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had never seen anything like this before. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Emily stood tall, her voice unwavering. "I think it's time you learned who he really is," she said, her tone calm but firm. "This is Max, and he's a retired Navy SEAL." The words hit the group of bikers like a slap to the face. They had been laughing and taunting her for so long, but now they were frozen in shock. The blind woman they had mocked? She wasn't just a blind woman. She wasn't just a helpless victim. She had a warrior by her side. A warrior who had served his country with honor. A warrior who had been trained for battle, for danger, for anything that came his way. Max wasn't just a guide dog. He was a retired Navy SEAL K-9, and he had been through more than any of them could ever imagine. And now, he was standing guard, ready to protect Emily with everything he had. The bikers stood frozen, their mouths hanging open in disbelief. They had no idea what they had just done. They had mocked a woman who had a protector, one of the most skilled, most loyal dogs in the world. They had no idea that they had pushed her to the edge, and now they were paying the price. Max stood tall, his body still tense, his eyes watching the group carefully. He was ready for anything. And Emily, her hand resting gently on his harness, knew that she was safe. She knew that Max had everything under control. The bikers, now completely quiet, glanced at each other, unsure of what to do next. They had underestimated Emily. They had underestimated Max. And now, they were learning the hard way that they had messed with the wrong people. The sound of the street seemed to vanish. The laughter and jeering from the bikers turned into complete stillness. The only sound now was the faint rustling of the leaves in the trees above, and the soft breath of Emily and Max as they stood there in the middle of the street. The biker who had been the most arrogant, the one with the thick beard, was still on the ground. He was trying to get up but had trouble, his eyes wide with shock. Max stood proudly by Emily's side, not backing down for a second. His muscles were tense, his stance strong. The look in his eyes was clear. He wasn't afraid of the bikers. He wasn't afraid of anyone. He was ready to protect Emily no matter what. Emily knew that Max had already made his point. The bikers had never expected this. They thought they could make fun of her because she was blind. They thought they could mock her and her dog without any consequences. But now, they were learning that this was no ordinary dog. This was Max, a retired Navy SEAL K-9. And Max had just shown them that he could handle anything that came his way. The bikers stood in shock. They were frozen in place, staring at Max and Emily, unable to move. The once confident and loud group had been silenced, and it was clear that they were too embarrassed to do anything now. Just then, the door to the cafe swung open. The manager of the cafe came rushing out, a worried look on his face. He had heard the noise and seen the chaos outside. When he saw the bikers, who had been causing trouble for days, he knew he had to act quickly. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," the manager said, his voice shaking a little. He was looking at Emily now, his face full of concern. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable in my cafe. I'm going to ask these gentlemen to leave right away." The manager turned toward the bikers. His voice was firm, but also full of an unspoken apology to Emily. "You all need to leave immediately. You have no business treating people like that here." The bikers exchanged uneasy looks, not knowing how to respond. They had always been the loudest voices in the cafe, always the center of attention. They had always gotten away with their rude behavior because no one had ever stood up to them. But now, with Emily's calm voice and Max's powerful presence, the tables had turned. The bikers were now the ones being asked to leave. Max let out a low growl, just to remind them that he was still there, guarding Emily. His growl was like a warning, and the bikers knew it. They were embarrassed. Their faces turned red, and they shuffled nervously. They could no longer ignore the truth. They had messed with the wrong person. The biker with the thick beard, still rubbing his sore arm from where Max had knocked him down, stood up slowly. He looked around at his friends, who all seemed to be feeling the same mixture of embarrassment and shame. No one said a word. They had lost their power. They had lost their confidence. They were no longer the loudest ones in the room. One by one, the bikers started gathering their things. They packed up their bags, shoved their chairs back under the table, and slowly walked toward the door. Some of them glanced at Emily and Max, but none of them dared to speak. They had been put in their place, and they knew it. As the last biker walked past, he muttered under his breath, "I didn't know. I didn't know." But Emily didn't react. She didn't need to say anything. She just stood tall, her hand resting gently on Max's harness. Max's ears were perked up, his eyes still fixed on the bikers as they left. The door to the cafe closed behind them with a soft thud. And just like that, the bikers were gone. The people who had been watching the scene from across the street, who had gathered around the cafe to see what was happening, slowly began to clap. It was quiet at first, but then it grew louder. People cheered. They weren't cheering for Max because he had knocked the biker down. They were cheering because Emily had stood up for herself and Max had protected her. They were cheering because the bullies had been shown that they couldn't win by being cruel to others. Emily and Max turned to walk away, and the crowd watched them in awe. Some people offered a small nod of respect. Others waved. A few even came up to them to say thank you. They were amazed at what had just happened. One woman, standing nearby, came over and spoke to Emily. "That was amazing. I had no idea who he was. You're so strong. And Max, wow, he's incredible." Emily smiled softly. "Thank you. But it's not just Max. It's about standing up for what's right." The woman nodded. "You've earned our respect today. I hope those bikers learned something from this." Emily didn't need to say anything in reply. She knew that the message had been sent. The bikers had learned that day that people who make fun of others can't always get away with it. Emily and Max had shown them what happens when you underestimate someone. They had shown them what true strength really looks like. As they walked down the street, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't need to be angry or upset. She didn't need to shout or scream. She had let Max handle it. And in doing so, she had shown that sometimes the quietest people can have the most powerful presence. Max's tail wagged slightly, and Emily smiled. They had faced the bullies and shown them that kindness, strength, and loyalty were more powerful than any rude remark. She was proud of Max, proud of herself, and proud of how the situation had turned out. And as they walked away, the people who had watched the whole scene unfold knew something important. Emily Dawson wasn't just a blind woman walking with her dog. She was a woman who deserved respect. She was a woman who knew how to stand up for herself. And anyone who ever tried to mess with her would have to face Max. And Max wasn't just any dog. Max was a retired Navy SEAL K9, and he had shown everyone just how strong he really was. Sometimes the quietest people in the room hold the most power. They don't need to show off or prove themselves. They simply let their actions speak for them. And for those who judge by appearances, they're the ones who never see it coming. The street was quiet now. The sun had started to set, casting a warm orange glow across the sidewalk. Emily and Max walked together, side by side, their shadows stretching long behind them. The world around them seemed peaceful, but deep inside, Emily knew that something had changed. Something important. She had always known who she was. She had always known the strength she carried inside of her. But today had been different. Today, she had shown the world just how strong she was without having to shout or make a big scene. She didn't need to explain herself to anyone. Her actions had done all the talking. Max trotted along beside her, his ears perked, his tail wagging slightly. He wasn't just any dog. He wasn't just a guide dog. Max was a retired Navy SEAL K-9, trained to protect, to defend, and to serve. But in that moment, he wasn't just protecting Emily. He was showing everyone who had ever judged her that they had been wrong. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated him. Emily smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the kind of peace you get from avoiding trouble or staying quiet. No, it was a deeper peace, one that came from knowing that she had done the right thing. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had earned the respect she deserved. As they continued walking, Emily thought about the bikers, how they had laughed at her and made fun of her. They had thought she was weak. They had thought they could push her around because she was blind. But what they didn't know was that she wasn't weak. She was strong in a way that they couldn't see or understand. And Max had been her protector, her shield. Together, they had shown that appearances don't always tell the whole story. Many people in the cafe had witnessed what had happened. They had seen how the bikers had been brought down, not by violence, but by the quiet power of one woman and her dog. Emily had never raised her voice. She had never gotten angry or shouted. Instead, she had simply walked on, confident in who she was, and the rest of the world had taken notice. For Emily, this moment wasn't just about standing up to the bikers. It was about showing the world that people with disabilities, people who may not look strong or powerful on the outside, can be incredibly powerful. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones you least expect. And that's the lesson Emily wanted others to learn. She didn't need to wear a cape or shout to prove her worth. She just needed to be herself. As Emily and Max reached the park, she found a bench under a large tree and sat down, feeling the cool breeze on her face. She took a deep breath, listening to the sounds around her. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear children laughing. The world felt right again. Max laid down beside her, his head resting on his paws. Emily reached over and gently patted his head. She didn't need to speak to him. He knew exactly how she felt. They had been through so much together, training, working, and now facing bullies who didn't understand the bond they shared. She thought back to the first day she had met Max. He had been a young, energetic puppy then, full of excitement. But he had also been trained for something much bigger than just being a guide dog. Max had been trained to protect, and that was exactly what he had done today. He had protected her, not just from the bikers, but from the judgment and ignorance of the world around them. And that was what made Max so special. He wasn't just a dog who helped Emily get from place to place. He was her partner, her friend, and her hero. But it wasn't just Max's strength that made him a hero. It was his loyalty, his courage, and his unwavering belief in protecting the one person who needed him most. For Emily, that was a lesson in strength. It wasn't about physical strength. It wasn't about how loud you could shout or how big you could make yourself appear. True strength came from within. True strength came from being kind when others were cruel. It came from standing up for what was right, even when no one else would. And sometimes, true strength came from knowing when to stay calm, when to remain silent, and when to let your actions speak for you. Emily thought about the respect she had earned that day. It wasn't because of the way she looked or the way she acted. It was because she had stayed true to herself. She had stayed strong, and that strength had spoken louder than anything the bikers could have said or done. Respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you have to earn. And Emily had earned that respect, not by proving herself to the bikers, but by simply being herself. She had shown them that strength comes in all forms, and that no one, no matter how big or loud they are, should ever be judged based on their appearance. The bikers had learned that lesson the hard way. But Emily didn't feel proud of their embarrassment. She didn't feel happy that they had been put in their place. What made her feel proud was knowing that she had changed their view of the world, even if only for a moment. What made her feel proud was knowing that the next time someone tried to hurt another person, those bikers would think twice before acting on their cruelty. The lesson wasn't just about Emily or Max. It was a lesson for everyone. The people in the cafe, the people on the street, and anyone who had witnessed what had happened that day, they would remember. They would remember how Emily stood strong, how Max protected her, and how the bikers learned that bullying doesn't get you anywhere. Emily looked up at the sky. The colors of the sunset were beautiful, a mix of oranges, pinks, and purples. It was as if the world itself was reflecting her feelings. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that the bikers had learned something important today. But she also knew that there were many more people out there who still didn't understand the value of kindness and respect. And that was okay, because Emily knew that the power to change the world didn't lie in changing everyone's mind at once. It lay in small, everyday actions. It lay in standing up for yourself and for others when no one else would. It lay in the quiet moments, the moments when you chose to stay calm, even when the world tried to knock you down. For Emily, it wasn't about being a hero. It was about showing others that everyone has worth, that everyone deserves respect, no matter their background, appearance, or abilities. And she would continue to walk through life, side by side with Max, letting her actions speak louder than words. Because sometimes, actions are the most powerful tool we have. As Emily stood up to leave the park, she took one last look at the sunset. She smiled, feeling proud of everything she had accomplished. She had shown the world that strength doesn't always shout, it whispers. It whispers in the quiet moments when we stand tall, even in the face of adversity. Max stood up beside her, ready for their next adventure. He had done his job, and Emily had done hers. Together, they were a team, and nothing could break their bond. And that's the thing. Sometimes, the people who seem the quietest are the ones who hold the most power. They don't need to prove anything. They don't need to boast or show off. They let their actions speak for them, and in doing so, they change the world around them. They remind us that kindness, strength, and respect are more powerful than any words can be. As Emily and Max walked off into the distance, their footsteps echoing softly behind them, it was clear that their journey was far from over. They had learned something important that day, and they would continue to carry that lesson with them. It was a lesson that would stay with them forever. And now, it's your turn to carry that lesson too. Because sometimes, the quietest voices are the ones that make the most noise. The quietest people are the ones who can change the world, one action at a time.